Have you ever wondered if it's possible to stay deeply spiritual while chasing profits, deadlines, and quarterly targets? In a world that moves faster than ever, where our days are consumed by endless meetings, investor updates, and bottom lines, it seems the deeper questions of life get left behind. But every so often, a moment arrives that changes everything. I want to tell you about a man named Daniel. A sharp, driven entrepreneur in his mid-30s, Daniel built a tech company from scratch in Silicon Valley. On the outside, he was everything success was supposed to look like: multi-million-dollar funding, a growing team, glowing articles in Forbes. But inside, he was unraveling: sleepless nights, constant anxiety, a hollow ache in his chest that no amount of money or recognition could fill. The harder he worked, the emptier he felt. One evening, after a grueling 12-hour day, Daniel sat alone in his office, the city lights flickering beyond the glass. And a thought struck him: what's the point of all this if it costs me my soul? That single question sent him on a journey not just to salvage his health or fix his schedule, but to rediscover meaning. And in his search, he stumbled upon something ancient yet quietly revolutionary: the teachings of Buddhism. Not in a temple on a distant mountaintop, not in the robes of a wandering monk, but right there in the heart of his business, woven into the chaos of boardrooms, emails, and launch days. And here's the thing: Daniel wasn't alone. From Fortune 500 executives to indie creators, an increasing number of entrepreneurs are turning to Buddhist wisdom, searching for something beyond productivity hacks or motivational slogans. They're craving an inner anchor in a world that glorifies speed and competition. But what does it really mean to practice Buddhism while running a business? Is it about quitting everything and escaping to the mountains? Or can it be something subtler, quieter, yet profoundly transformative? Some believe spirituality and commerce don't mix, that one must renounce the material world to touch the sacred. But that's a misconception rooted in surface-level readings of ancient texts. Because if you look closely, you'll find that Buddhist philosophy isn't about denying the world, it's about understanding it, about engaging with life's impermanence, with its pleasures and challenges, without clinging or aversion. And what better training ground for that than the volatile, ego-driven, high-stakes world of business? Imagine negotiating $1 million contract not from greed or fear, but from clarity and compassion. Picture leading a company where people aren't just employees, but human beings honored for their inherent dignity. Consider the power of making decisions rooted not just in profit, but in wisdom, kindness, and awareness of their ripple effects on communities and the planet. Sounds idealistic, maybe, but it's happening. In unexpected corners of the business world, ancient Buddhist principles like mindfulness, non-attachment, compassion, and ethical livelihood are being quietly applied, not as corporate wellness trends, but as guiding philosophies. Yet here's the twist: when Buddhist wisdom enters the business world, it often gets diluted, turned into 10-minute meditations to boost productivity, stripped of its deeper purpose, reduced to a tool for getting more done faster. That's not what we're exploring here. This is about going deeper, about understanding how timeless teachings can serve not just our personal peace, but the well-being of our organizations, our clients, our employees, and ourselves, without abandoning ambition or the drive to create. Because Buddhism isn't about retreating from life. It's about meeting it moment by moment with presence, with awareness, with courage. And that's where this journey begins. Over the next chapters, we'll dive into the real questions. Why is this integration needed now more than ever? What core Buddhist teachings directly shape how we do business? How can mindfulness be more than a buzzword? And is it truly possible to lead with compassion in a market built on competition? We'll meet entrepreneurs who have tried, some who succeeded, others who stumbled. We'll unpack practices you can adopt today. Not dogmas, not rituals you need to escape your life for, but principles that help you stay awake within it. Because maybe, just maybe, business itself can be a spiritual practice. A living, breathing canvas where mindfulness, ethics, and impermanence aren't distant ideals, but everyday realities. And along the way, you might just discover what Daniel did. That the real profit isn't the one you measure in dollars. It's the peace you carry home after the last meeting ends. The integrity you feel when decisions align with your values. The clarity that cuts through the noise, reminding you why you started this journey in the first place. So take a breath, let the noise settle, and as the world rushes by, let's begin this exploration together. If the 20th century was about chasing bigger, faster, and louder, the 21st century is quietly teaching us that something's missing. We live in a world more connected than ever before. Our devices buzz with endless notifications. Opportunities are everywhere. And yet, anxiety, burnout, and disconnection have become epidemics of our age. Somewhere along the way, in the rush to build faster systems, smarter AI, and global supply chains, we neglected to ask a crucial question. What is all this for? That question isn't new. It's the same question asked by monks under Bodhi trees, philosophers in ancient markets, and poets staring at midnight skies. But today, it's become urgent. A recent study by Deloitte found that 77% of people say they've experienced burnout at their current job. CEOs, founders, employees, no one's immune. And while modern businesses pour billions into wellness programs, mindfulness apps, and productivity hacks, something is still missing. Because these are often surface-level solutions for a much deeper problem. The problem isn't that we're too busy. It's that we've lost our way. We've been taught to measure success by growth charts and quarterly earnings, not by the quality of our relationships or the calmness of our minds. We're so conditioned to chase what's next that we've forgotten how to be here now. And ironically, the more we achieve, the more it seems to cost us. Families drift apart, health declines. Inner lives are left neglected, gathering dust while we build empires no one will remember a century from now. This isn't just a personal issue. It's a business issue. Because companies aren't abstract entities. They're made of people. And when those people are exhausted, disconnected, and driven by fear, it shapes the culture, decisions, and legacies those companies leave behind. That's why, in recent years, you've seen headlines like, "Top CEOs meditate before board meetings," "Mindfulness training for Fortune 500 executives," "Tech giants embrace Buddhist wisdom." At first glance, it might seem like a trend. Another tool for sharper focus, faster execution, and better returns. And to be honest, that's how many organizations treat it. They adopt mindfulness not to transform hearts, but to squeeze more productivity out of already overstretched teams. It becomes a bandage over a fractured system. But beneath the hype lies something quietly powerful. Because for those willing to look beyond the surface, Buddhist wisdom offers more than stress relief. It offers a blueprint for rehumanizing work. You see, the Buddha never promised an easy life. He promised clarity, an end to needless suffering. And if there's one thing modern business desperately needs, it's clarity. Clarity about what matters, about how our decisions ripple beyond balance sheets, about the impermanence of every achievement and the importance of how we show up in each moment. This wisdom is timeless, and yet it feels tailor-made for this moment in history. In an era of environmental collapse, rising inequality, and widespread disillusionment with traditional corporate structures, people are searching for leaders with heart, for organizations that value integrity over image, for work cultures where compassion isn't a weakness but a strategic advantage. The evidence is everywhere. Companies that prioritize employee well-being outperform their competitors. Brands rooted in authenticity and ethics foster fierce customer loyalty. And leaders who cultivate emotional intelligence, mindfulness, and ethical clarity make better decisions under pressure. Why? Because they're anchored. They're not reacting blindly to the highs and lows of the market. They're leading from a place of awareness. And that awareness isn't manufactured in a weekend seminar. It's cultivated through practice, through pausing, through questioning long-held assumptions about what success looks like. Buddhist philosophy teaches us that suffering arises when we cling to outcomes, to identities, to illusions of control. And isn't that what much of modern business is built upon? The desperate attempt to control an uncontrollable world. But what if instead we learn to navigate uncertainty with grace, to see every deal, every setback, every market shift as part of the constant, flowing nature of life? What if we built companies not on domination but on mutual flourishing? That's not a utopian fantasy. It's a practical necessity. Because as markets evolve, as younger generations demand meaning alongside paychecks, and as mental health crises cripple productivity, the old models are breaking down. It's no longer enough to be the biggest or the fastest. The future belongs to those who are clear, compassionate, and awake. And that's why this matters. Because you don't have to choose between building a thriving business and cultivating a meaningful life. The two can and should fuel each other. Buddhism offers a way not through religious conversion but through practical wisdom, through timeless principles that remind us everything changes, our actions matter, and true strength comes not from force but from clarity. So before we dive into the tools and stories ahead, take a moment. Ask yourself honestly, what is my business really for? What kind of leader do I want to become? And when the noise dies down, what will I have built in the world and within myself? Because those answers will shape not just your career, but your legacy. And in the chapters ahead, we'll uncover how ancient Buddhist teachings can help you answer those questions, not as abstract ideals, but as living, breathing practices in boardrooms, in brainstorms, and in the quiet moments between. Before we talk about how to bring Buddhism into your business, we have to get one thing straight. Buddhism isn't a belief system in the way most people think. It's not about worshiping statues or chanting mantras you don't understand. It's not about shaving your head and abandoning your home. At its core, Buddhism is a method, a clear, practical approach for understanding the nature of reality and learning how to live in harmony with it. Over 2,500 years ago, Siddhartha Gautama, the man we now call the Buddha, wasn't looking to start a religion. He was searching for a way to end unnecessary suffering, not just for himself, but for everyone. And the method he uncovered is as relevant in your boardroom as it was beneath the Bodhi tree. So, what are these foundations? And how can they quietly reshape the way we build, lead, and work together? Let's begin where all Buddhist teaching begins, with understanding suffering. The first foundation, understanding dukkha. In Buddhism, the word dukkha describes the dissatisfaction woven into life itself. It's the low-grade anxiety of always chasing the next client, the stress before a product launch, the emptiness after hitting a milestone that felt so important, only to feel hollow the next morning. Business magnifies dukkha because it deals with impermanence on steroids. Markets change, customers leave, trends fade. One quarter you're a unicorn, the next you're obsolete. The Buddhist wisdom isn't to deny this, but to see it clearly. When you accept that everything changes, you stop clinging. And when you stop clinging, you make better, wiser decisions. You stop building strategies from fear. You start leading from clarity. The second foundation, the law of cause and effect karma. Forget mystical ideas of karma as cosmic punishment. In Buddhism, karma is much simpler. It's cause and effect. Every decision you make sends ripples into the future. The way you treat your employees, your customers, your competitors, all of it shapes the environment you'll work within tomorrow. If you build a business on deception, the consequences will return. If you cultivate generosity, integrity, and awareness, those qualities will shape your team, your brand, and your long-term resilience. It's not superstition. It's systems thinking before systems thinking had a name. In modern business terms, your culture is your karma. What you plant now determines what you harvest later. The third foundation, non-attachment. This might be the hardest one for ambitious entrepreneurs to swallow. Non-attachment doesn't mean apathy. It means not letting your identity be consumed by outcomes. Your company's valuation isn't your worth. A failed pitch isn't a failed self. When you learn to act skillfully without clinging to results, you free yourself from the wild swings of success and failure. This doesn't kill your ambition, it purifies it. You work not for ego, but for impact. You lead not for control, but to serve something meaningful. And paradoxically, this often leads to greater success because you stop making desperate, short-sighted choices driven by fear of loss. The fourth foundation, the middle way. The Buddha taught that wisdom lies between extremes, not in indulgence and not in denial. In business, this is the balance between profit and purpose, between innovation and stability, between taking bold risks and respecting sustainable limits. Many companies crash because they pursue endless growth at any cost. Others stagnate because they fear change. The middle way isn't about being mediocre. It's about knowing when to push and when to pause, when to scale and when to simplify. It's the art of timing, something every great leader quietly masters. The fifth foundation, compassion as strategy. In Buddhist thought, K-A-R-U letter 1E47 macron or compassion isn't sentimental weakness. It's wisdom in action. A leader who understands suffering, their own and others, naturally makes wiser, kinder decisions. And no, this isn't bad for business. In fact, research from Harvard and Stanford shows that compassionate leadership reduces burnout, increases loyalty, and improves team performance. Think about it. Who do you work harder for? The boss who threatens you, or the one who listens to you? The supplier who nickel and dimes, or the partner who treats you like a human being? The future of business belongs to those who realize that compassion isn't a liability. It's a long-term advantage. Integrating these foundations. You don't have to turn your office into a monastery. You don't have to give up your ambitions. You simply have to begin asking better questions. Are we building from fear or from clarity? Are our decisions aligned with long-term well-being, ours and others? Are we attached to outcomes in ways that distort our judgment? Are we embracing the middle way between reckless risk and fearful stagnation? Are we practicing compassion not as charity, but as intelligent strategy? The answers won't always be easy, but asking them puts you ahead of 90% of leaders out there. Because the truth is, every business is a spiritual practice. Whether you know it or not, every deal tests your integrity. Every setback tests your resilience. Every hire shapes your karma. The question isn't whether you'll practice Buddhism in business. It's whether you'll do it consciously. And when you do, when you ground your leadership in these timeless principles, you don't just build companies, you build legacies. It's one thing to talk about Buddhist wisdom in theory, but how does it look when it steps into a real office, a buzzing startup, or a crowded boardroom? Let's see these ancient foundations in action. Scene 1. The pitch that didn't break a man. David was a young tech entrepreneur. After months of development, he landed a meeting with a powerful venture capitalist. This was the pitch that could change his life. But halfway through, he saw the investor's expression harden. Questions turned sharp. Doubts surfaced. Most people would have panicked, clung desperately to closing the deal. Spoken faster, promised more than they could deliver. But David had been studying mindfulness. He remembered one line from a Buddhist teaching: clinging is the birthplace of suffering. So he took a quiet breath, noticed the tightness in his chest, and instead of forcing the deal, he said, "It sounds like this might not be a fit right now. That's okay. My priority is building something valuable whether we work together or not." The room went silent. Then, to his surprise, the investor smiled. "That's the most honest thing I've heard all week," she said. The deal still didn't happen, but another opportunity opened days later from someone who admired his integrity. David didn't lose anything. He lost the illusion of control and gained his self-respect. Lesson: non-attachment isn't about not caring. It's about not letting fear dictate your moves. Scene 2. The company that embraced impermanence. An organic food company called Earthwise had a problem. Their best-selling product, a popular snack bar, was starting to tank. Competitors copied their formula. Sales plummeted. The founder, Mia, gathered her team. They could double down on advertising, slash prices, or, and this was risky, retire the product. Many protested. It was their top revenue stream for years. But Mia followed a Buddhist insight. Nothing conditioned is permanent. Clinging to fading forms is a slow death. So they let it go. Reinvested resources into new, better products. Within a year, Earthwise was leading the market with innovations their competitors hadn't seen coming. While others clung to the past, they moved with the truth of change. Lesson: impermanence isn't a threat, it's an ally if you have the courage to let go. Scene 3, Karma in a Paycheck. At a boutique design firm, a junior staff member made a costly error. A client's campaign had to be reworked overnight. Everyone expected the boss, Helen, to explode, but she didn't. Instead, Helen calmly assessed the damage, then gathered her team. She addressed the mistake, made corrections, then personally mentored the staff member on what went wrong. Later, someone asked her why she wasn't harsher. Helen smiled. I could punish her, make her afraid to try, or I could invest in her potential. That's my karma. I build people, not prisons. Months later, that employee led a project that brought in one of their biggest contracts. Lesson: karma isn't mystical. It's the culture you create every single day. Scene 4. Compassion as smart leadership. During the pandemic, a medium-sized logistics company faced impossible choices. Orders dropped. Expenses mounted. Many companies slashed staff to survive. But their CEO, Jamal, took a different approach. He cut his own salary, negotiated with landlords and vendors, found creative ways for his people to work remotely and safely. He told his employees, "If we go down together. But as long as there's breath in this company, we look after our own." Some thought it was naive, but something happened. Productivity went up. Turnover dropped to zero. Clients stayed loyal because they admired how the company treated its people. Today, they're thriving. Lesson: compassion isn't softness. It's resilience in human form. You see, Buddhist wisdom isn't abstract. It's not just for temples or retreats. It's in every difficult meeting, every hiring decision, every time you choose patience over anger, clarity over impulse, people over profit. And those choices, like small pebbles dropped in a still pond, ripple out far beyond what you can see. They shape your culture, your brand, your reputation, and most importantly, the kind of person you become through your work. Because in the end, no business outlives its karma, and no leader escapes their own mind. Throughout history, wisdom has always guided those who dared to see beyond numbers, titles, and fleeting fame. The Buddha, over 2,500 years ago, offered a map not just for individual liberation, but for navigating life's entanglements with clarity and grace. And today, in our world of cutthroat markets and relentless demands, that wisdom matters more than ever. Many who run businesses today feel an invisible pressure, the expectation to compete, to outperform, to accumulate. But beneath that pressure lies a deeper hunger, the hunger to create something meaningful, to lead with integrity, and to leave behind more than just profits. And this is where Buddhism quietly, yet powerfully, steps in. To run a business in alignment with Dharma isn't about wearing robes or chanting between meetings. It's about cultivating a framework, a living, breathing philosophy that shapes how you build, how you lead, how you decide. At the heart of this is intention. The Buddha taught, whatever a person frequently thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of their mind. In the business world, intentions often get buried beneath quarterly goals and growth targets. But a Dharma-powered business begins by asking, why are we really doing this? Is it to serve, to heal, to empower, or simply to conquer and consume? That intention isn't a poster on a wall. It's the invisible architect of your company's future. Every strategy, every product, every relationship flows from it. From intention comes clarity of vision. The Buddha reminded us, all conditioned things are impermanent. And yet, how many companies cling desperately to what no longer serves them? How many leaders fight change, resisting the inevitable tides of impermanence? A Dharma-informed business doesn't fear change. It studies causes and conditions. It understands that what arises ceases, that markets, trends, and opportunities are waves to surf, not to own. This clarity gives birth to mindful speech. In commerce, words are currency. They can build trust or break it in an instant. Most advertising today thrives on exaggeration, half-truths, and carefully crafted omissions. But the Dharma asks us to speak truthfully, to communicate in ways that uplift rather than deceive. In tough moments, it means being honest without cruelty. In negotiations, it means listening without prejudice. And then, there is action. Business is made up of 1,000 decisions every single day. Some small, some monumental. The question is, what kind of seeds are we planting with those decisions? Are they rooted in greed, fear, and ego? Or are they gestures of wisdom, compassion, and courage? The Dharma reminds us, every action carries a consequence. In a world obsessed with legality, a mindful leader also asks, is this compassionate? Is this skillful? And so naturally, livelihood becomes central. The Buddha urged us to avoid livelihoods that cause suffering, whether through deceit, exploitation, or violence. In modern terms, it means refusing to profit by harming others, the environment, or society. It means choosing suppliers who treat their workers with dignity. It means creating workplaces where people feel safe, valued, and awake. But perhaps the greatest tool of all is mindfulness. In the blur of endless deadlines and data dashboards, presence is easily lost. And yet, distraction is the enemy of wisdom. A Dharma-powered business cultivates mindfulness not as a trend, but as an operational value. Meetings open with a moment of silence. Negotiations begin with genuine listening. Leaders pause before reacting, creating space for wiser choices. In the end, it's about karma. Not in the mystical sense, but as the lived truth that what you put out into the world inevitably returns. A company generates karma in every email, every contract, every customer experience. And this karma shapes not only reputation, but the internal culture, the joy of its people, and the quality of its work. A Dharma-informed business tends to its karma like a careful gardener. It tracks not just profits, but acts of service. It celebrates not just sales milestones, but ethical victories. And it resolves conflict not by dominance, but by compassion. Because here's the unspoken truth no business school teaches. Culture is what's written on your website. It's what you do when no one is watching. It's the quiet courage to choose integrity over convenience, wisdom over impulse, people over profit. When you build a business upon this Dharma-powered framework, it stops being a soulless machine. It becomes a living field of intention, a force for healing, a space where people don't just work for money, they work for meaning. Will it make you immune to failure? No, but it will make you fearless. Because you'll know, no matter the outcome, your work leaves no trail of harm. It uplifts, it frees. And in a world starved for leaders with conscience, that is your greatest competitive edge. Stories have always been the way human beings make sense of the world. Long before data charts, marketing strategies, or corporate mission statements, people gathered around fires under ancient trees to tell stories. Stories of loss and courage, of greed and wisdom, of those who failed and those who rose above. In Buddhism, storytelling isn't entertainment, it's a transmission, a way to plant seeds in the heart. The Buddha himself taught through parables. He told of kings and beggars, of lost sons and restless seekers, of monks who stumbled and merchants who betrayed. Each story a mirror, each character a reflection of us. And so, if you wish to build a business guided by Dharma, you must understand the power of narrative not as a marketing trick, but as a way to lead, to heal, and to awaken. Let me take you into a story. There was once a wealthy trader named Ananda who built an empire selling spices across kingdoms. His ships sailed through storms. His warehouses overflowed with rare goods. And yet, at night, Ananda's heart was restless. He saw the desperation of his laborers, the sorrow of the mothers who lost sons at sea, the deceit in deals struck in haste. One evening, overcome by his own emptiness, Ananda sought the counsel of a wandering monk. The monk listened silently as Ananda poured out his wealth, his fears, his loneliness. And then the monk said only this: "The measure of a person is not in what they keep, but in what they set free." It struck Ananda like lightning. From that day, his business transformed. He paid fair wages. He refused dishonest trades. He built a refuge for widows and sailors. His profits didn't vanish, they grew, but so did his peace. And when many years later his ships were lost in a great storm, Ananda wept, but without bitterness, because he knew he had left no harm in his wake. This is not a legend. It is a truth we see again and again. Modern businesses often tell stories of conquest. We captured market share. We dominated the industry. We crushed competitors. But a Dharma-guided enterprise tells a different story, one of stewardship, of building rather than conquering, of lifting rather than exploiting, of partnerships, not victims. And those stories aren't told only to customers. They are told to employees when deciding who to hire, who to promote. They are told to suppliers when choosing contracts. They are told to investors when explaining long-term vision over short-term gains. Because here's the secret: the stories you tell become the culture you live. In one Buddhist monastery, a rule was kept for centuries. Before the head monk made a major decision, he would gather the community and ask, if this action were a story told 7 generations from now, would it bring shame or pride? Imagine if every CEO asked this. Imagine if every entrepreneur paused before cutting corners or chasing trends and asked, what story will this decision tell about me, about us, about what we stood for? In a Dharma-powered business, storytelling becomes a practice of mindfulness. Not fiction, but a record of intentions made visible. And stories have ripple effects. When one business refuses to exploit, others notice. When one leader chooses compassion over ambition, it challenges the silent agreements of an industry. When one company thrives while honoring its people and planet, it rewrites what's possible. I once met a woman named Kema, who ran a chain of tea shops in a bustling Asian metropolis. In a market obsessed with expansion, Kema grew slowly. She trained teenage workers abandoned by their families. She sourced from farmers paid twice the market rate. Her margins were thinner than her competitors, but her customers came not just for tea, they came for a story. Each cup told of a mother no longer hungry, a student who could finally afford school books, a farmer who didn't have to sell his land. Kema's business was modest by Wall Street standards, but it flourished year after year, because she understood a truth that transcends business schools. People don't just buy products, they buy the meaning attached to them. And meaning, my friend, is currency more valuable than gold. This is the soul of deep dive storytelling. It's not about viral ad campaigns or clever slogans. It's about crafting a living narrative where every decision, every policy, every act of kindness weaves together to tell a story worth believing in. A story where business is no longer a battlefield, but a sacred space for awakening. When you lead this way, you won't need to fight for attention. The world will lean in, not because you shouted the loudest, but because your story whispered the deepest truths. And so, we come to the end of this journey. From ancient monasteries to modern boardrooms, from the tales of wandering monks to the decisions faced by entrepreneurs today, one truth endures. It is not what we possess that defines us, but what we offer to the world through the way we live, lead, and serve. Running a business is not inherently virtuous or corrupt. Like the mind, it becomes what you make of it. You've seen how Buddhist principles, mindfulness, compassion, wisdom, and ethical conduct are not dusty relics of the past, but living tools that can shape businesses that heal instead of harm, uplift instead of exploit, and endure not by ruthless conquest, but by the quiet strength of integrity. We spoke of Ananda's awakening, of Kema's humble tea shops, of decisions made not for immediate profit but for the long story, the one told 7 generations from now. And now, my friend, it falls to you. What kind of story will your business tell? What ripples will your decisions leave behind? You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have all the answers. The Dharma teaches us that even the smallest good intention, the faintest kind act, ripples through the fabric of existence in ways we cannot measure. Perhaps it begins with how you greet your team tomorrow. Perhaps in how you handle that difficult client call, or in pausing one more breath before chasing the next shiny opportunity. Business isn't a separate path from spirituality. It's one of the sharpest arenas where our values are tested and made real. And so, as you close this chapter, remember, the measure of your life's success will not be in numbers alone, but in how your story shaped those around you. If this message has stirred something in you, a question, a reflection, a spark of courage, I invite you to walk this path with us. Subscribe to our channel, Zen Buddhism Wisdom. Every week we explore teachings like these, ancient truths for modern lives, stories to steady your heart and sharpen your vision, and insights to remind you that you're not alone on this path. Leave a comment below. What's one small Dharma principle you'd like to bring into your work this week? We read everyone. We walked this journey together. And if you found value here, share this video. Not for the algorithm, but because good stories like good karma are meant to be passed on. Until next time, may your work be wise, your heart steady, and your story worth the telling.